Before I forget, the closing event tonight will be at the River Crossing Lodge. River Crossing Lodge for people not from Windhoek. Like last night, we will make provisions for transportation to that place. If you are a Windhoeker, you're on your own. Number one, you're on your own, but that means please still come. So that's why tea breaks are there. Tea breaks are there for you to network. So find a friend to get a ride if there's a need for that. I already have enough for my car. And for those Windhoekers who may not be clear on where River Crossing is, it's on the way to the airport, but the airport is too far. As you are driving out that main road towards the airport, you go under a bridge. Immediately to your right, maybe 400, 500 meters to your right is where the gravel road is. It's about 1 kilo or 2 up the mountain. So it's mostly one of those, they say for what, 4x4s, 2x2s, one of those cars. But please don't get lost. Should you get lost, hopefully you have my number and I can try and redirect. This session is on media, and for it we have Frederico Links as moderator, a presentation by Karen Mohan, Frederico Links is the editor of Inside Magazine. Presentation by Karen Mohan, who's with MISA Regional, specialist in media law, advocacy and policy. Unfortunately, due to something that came up, Clement Daniels, the media ombudsman, cannot join us. He has a case in court to take care of. And our panelists are Emily Brown, Head of Department Journalism Studies at the Polytechnic of Namibia. Gwen Lister, former editor and chairperson of the Namibia Media Trust. Joseph Ailonga, General Manager, Radio Energy 100 FM. Umbika Raihe UP, NBC GM Marketing and Corporate Communications. And now, Tommy Kadamila didn't change pigmentation overnight. He's not here, and so we humbly asked Mr. Nahum Golik, who is the director of Now Life, an organization that deals primarily with a lot of information and communication in media, also a former Director General of NBC, to fill out our panel. So on that note, Mr. Karen Mohan for her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Gamane. Good morning, or afternoon almost at this stage. It's a pleasure to speak to you this morning on behalf of the Media Institute of Southern Africa on the subject of access to information in the media. I've been asked today to give you a brief presentation on media and information. There is a short brief in your packs. I think you all got homework last night to read it. I don't know how many of you made it through the whole 4 pages. But for those of you that did, this is not necessarily going to go over the information that's in your packs because you can read that yourselves. But just a brief overview, I think, of some of the issues with regard to access to information and the media. I really hope that coming out of this session today and listening to some of our experts to the right on this issue, that we'll all go away a lot more enlightened on the issues of the importance of access to information and the media. I think firstly we should probably point out that movements around access to information are often criticised as being too media focused, or in some circumstances people say that they're hijacked by the media. I think it's really, really wonderful that we have so many different sectors joining the media on this occasion to discuss issues around access to information, not only as citizens of Namibia, but also I think in terms of representing your own sectoral interests and how important access to information is to that. I think already in the session this morning on socioeconomic rights, we really realised that not only is it important during the campaign for access to information that all the different sectors are involved, but also when it comes to implementation. It's going to be a piece of legislation that nobody can use unless people are actually able to tell people how to use it. But having said that, I think that there is a particularly good reason why campaigns have often been initiated and pushed by the media. That being, I think without having access to information, it is virtually impossible to carry out the profession and their very important role in society. I think it's also important to point out that media issues are everybody's issues. When the media right to freedom of expression and access to information is infringed, the direct result is that our right to access to information will be infringed. I mean, where do we all go to get up-to-date information on what's happening in the country that we live in? I know that I, for one, go directly to newspapers, I switch on the radio, I switch on the TV, I go online. In fact, it was recently revealed that a survey done on Namibians showed that something like 60% of Namibians depended on the media for their education in terms of human rights. And I think that really begs the question, if the media have difficulty in accessing information, and 60% of citizens are dependent on this as their sole source of information, how educated are Namibian citizens going to be about their human rights? Also, I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that Windhoek is the home of the Windhoek Declaration, which guarantees press freedom. And if the principles are not safeguarded by the government and citizens of Namibia, where can we expect those to be upheld? As most of you are aware, or at least those of you who are involved with the media, Article 21(1)(a) of Namibia's constitution provides for the right of freedom of expression and states that all persons shall have the right to freedom of speech and expression, which shall include freedom of the press and other media. Namibia, as you know, is recognized as one of the leading countries in terms of press freedom on the continent. A lot of media practitioners, I think, in Namibia often say that they're surprised by this. And I think that whilst freedom of expression and press freedom are both guaranteed by the Namibian constitution, we have to ask ourselves, how free can the press be without access to information? I think it's good to think of the media's relationship with information as two-pronged, in that they're both consumers and they're conduits of information. And the second role is important as it carries with it, I think, a lot of responsibilities. The media has a role to play in ensuring that they're providing quality information to the public. Where they are able to access information, it's important that they critically analyse such information, as well as understand the impact such information will have on the public. In the provision of information, it's important that the media ensures that there is adequate public participation, that issues are presented fairly, that editorial independence is respected, that they participate actively with important issues, and that they're providing relevant information on public matters. Whilst this role is extremely important, it's largely dependent on the first, which is their actual, that the fact that they're actually consumers of information, and in order for them to consume that information, that they need access to information. I think it's important to note that while there's a constitutional right to press freedom in Namibia, there are a number of laws in place that undermine this right. I'm going to list a few laws that restrict access to information. I know sometimes people don't like it when lawyers start going on about legislation and the number of laws that are in place, but I think it's really important to just point out the actual vast number of laws that are currently restricting press freedom and access to information in Namibia. I think one of them, and the first one that we would look at, is the Protection of Information Act of 1982. This one, I think, is a particularly scary act. It's an apartheid law protecting state secrets. The second one that we could look at would be the Namibian Broadcasting Act of 1992. And sections 5 and 4.2 of those interfere with broadcaster independence. The third one that we could look at is the Namibian Communications Commission Act, and sections 3, 20, and 26 all interfere with editorial independence. We could look at the 1995 Public Services Act, which has Article 25, which is a prohibition on civil servants from releasing information without prior permission. We could look at Namibia's Central Intelligence Service Act, which has overbroad limitations. We could look at Namibia's Film Commission Act of 2000, which has a number of secrecy provisions. Or again, we could look at, and lastly, the 2002 Defence Act. And Article 54 of this Act stretches limitations far beyond the boundaries of permissible restrictions on access to information with regard to state security. I think it's particularly scary given Namibia's rating in terms of its press freedom that there is this number of laws in place that restrict freedom of the press in Namibia. One of these laws, as I pointed out, that's particularly could potentially have a very detrimental effect on freedom of the press and is that Protection of Information Act of 1982, which is a piece of legislation, again, as I said, enacted during apartheid, and it has some quite severe provisions in terms of its potential to affect the free flow of information. And in fact, one of the provisions, I think, which is particularly bad is Section 4 of this. And Section 4 of this Act forbids a person from disclosing information based on his or her employment with government. So you can just imagine how that would affect the public's right to access information or the media's right to access information. There's no point, I think, in providing a right such as the constitutional right to freedom of expression and freedom of the press if you're going to have other legislation which undermines it and takes away from this right. That's why prohibitive legislation must be repealed, and it's so necessary, not just for freedom of the press, I think, but the realization of most human rights and socioeconomic rights that access to information legislation is put in place. I should also probably mention that MISA carries out research annually on the most open and secretive government institutions in Southern Africa, which includes Namibia. And it's generally found that it's extremely difficult to access information with regard to very simple requests for information. I know the IPPR also carried out similar research, and they found on average that it took 60 days for them to get a response for simple requests for information. So, I mean, you can just imagine as a professional journalist who's on a deadline, how can you possibly wait 60 days to receive information? Whilst the media in Namibia, it's often criticised, and it has been, I think, particularly during this conference, and not following up on issues and not thoroughly investigating them, I think we can't be too surprised in light of these findings, because I'm sure most stories are dead and buried by the time media practitioners receive the required information, or that they can even follow up or break a news story. The role of the media is extremely important in any democracy. It's often called a fourth estate or a branch of government. The South African Constitutional Court has held that the media bears an obligation to provide citizens with a platform for the exchange of ideas, which is crucial to the development of a democratic process. A free, pluralistic, and independent press is necessary in any democracy. The media also plays an important role as a watchdog of society, ensuring that the public are protected from abuse of power, uncovering corrupt practices, and generally protecting the interests of the public. This role is clearly a powerful one, and it's without doubt that one of the reasons that so many administrations clamp down on freedom of the press through a number of legislative measures, not just the denial of the right to information, is so common. I think we have to acknowledge that the saying that knowledge is power and effectively stripping people of their right to information is also stripping them of the powerful role that they have within society. I think it's a particularly sad state of affairs because, in fact, it doesn't benefit anyone when such measures are put in place. It obviously doesn't benefit the media or citizens who are dependent on the information that they provide, but it also really doesn't benefit government. The media is the direct line to the public, which governments should really be utilising. If government truly wants a democratic and participatory democracy, then the media is a perfect instrument to ensure that government can remain in constant dialogue with its people. It's also the mechanism where government can promote all the positive achievements that it has made and also its good work that it is doing for its citizens. It's also an instrument that can be used to ensure that information about legislation and policies is disseminated to the public in an easily understandable manner and in many different languages. Lastly, I also think that governments also forget that it's important for governments to ensure that media has adequate access to information so that they're getting the right message across. There are often complaints from public institutions about media reporting incorrect information or unsubstantial rumours about their activities. But if they continue to jealously guard information from both the public and the media, they cannot be surprised when rumours and innuendo are the result of such practices. The absence of access to information legislation, which hinders the media's ability to receive and consume information, hinders its ability to report accurately and in turn negatively affects its ability to provide quality information to the public. I always use this quote from Stephen Adler because I really like it, but it states that to be ill-informed and to speak freely is a form of intellectual slavery. I think there couldn't be a truer saying in terms of access to information. You know, and I always say in terms of this, is this the type of society that we want? You know, it's the media who are responsible for informing the public. If they cannot freely access information, they will be ill-informed, and as a result, the general public will be ill-informed. As I said, secrecy doesn't benefit anyone. Let's protect this great democracy that was formed after independence and push for legal reform in the area of access to information. Let's ensure that the media can carry out the crucial role that it was intended for when the Constitution of Namibia was enacted to promote the interests of Namibian citizens. We've heard many different arguments for why access to information is so important in Namibian society. I really hope that after this conference, all of these groups, including the media, work together to ensure that this right becomes a realization for all citizens. We don't want to be sitting here having these discussions again in 14 years, asking the government why have they still not implemented access to information. We want to be discussing the impact that our access to information law has had on society and on the citizens of Namibia over the past 14 years. I will reiterate that one of the most exciting things about this conference has been the coming together of so many sectors on this one issue that I think affects us all. Let's use this unity to ensure that access to information no longer remains a lofty ideal that we all wish we had, but becomes a reality. I hope that the recommendations from the conference are carried forward to create a legal instrument that we can all be proud of and that will lead to the betterment of all people in Namibia, and will also enhance the constitutional rights upon which the state was built, and ensuring that democracy, rule of law and justice for all is truly provided for, and that freedom of expression and press freedom are safeguarded against oppression. With that, I'm going to hand you back to the real experts on the issue. I'm sure there will be some very fruitful debates about media and information. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Karen. I don't think you can be confused for the good news bearer today, but there's hope in what you said. And it's true what Karen said in terms of journalism on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis.
We can't hear you. Speak into the mic.
Hello? Oh. Should I repeat? Yeah. All right. No, I just said Karen had, some of what Karen said at the beginning was fairly terrifying in terms of the legislation that's on the books here. But there's also hope in what she said for journalists, for the media environment. What else? The message also that came out of what she said was that for us as journalists and media workers, trying to get hold of information on a daily, on a weekly, and on a monthly basis is a continuous and consistent liberation struggle, especially taking into account our media environment, our information environment, where information is not properly kept, information is not freely available, information is centralized. So that makes journalists, that is a demoralizing factor for journalists on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. And perhaps to start off the panel discussion, perhaps it's appropriate that we ask the panelists to sort of give an idea of how they see the access to information environment in terms of the media, and then also to describe for us what the ideal situation would be in terms of this discussion. I'll pass on to Gwen first.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Just to start out, I think there's probably unanimous agreement that when we talk about access to information campaigns or an access to information law, that what we're really talking about is the people. I think that must be absolutely clear. We're not talking about a law that is there specifically to benefit the media. But that having been said, I think it is true to say that the primary conduit at the moment of information to the people is, to a large extent, the media. And so that needs to be definitely part of the discussion. And our job is made easier or more difficult depending on the type of information that we can access, if at all. I do want to just put into this mix, and I don't know if it has been mentioned before now, that Namibia, unlike South Africa, which abandoned that, has a Ministry of Information. So, I ask you all to keep that in mind, that even though they have a Ministry of Information with various media at their disposal, including a state broadcaster, a news agency, a daily newspaper, and others, I think a lot of focus needs to be put on whether government is, if you look at those institutions, if it isn't providing the Namibian people with the news it needs, then obviously its main receptor is the government, and it's not happening. So I think that's an important consideration, because a huge proportion of our budget goes into the retention of that ministry. And if I'm correct, our South African colleagues can correct me, South Africa did away with the Ministry of Information as a somewhat a dinosaur relic of the old era of draconian African governments. So it's interesting to see how that ministry could be used with this very important access to information campaign. My second point is I think we need to make a very clear distinction here when we talk about media between the so-called traditional media, and for those of you who don't know, it is the traditional media are the newspapers, radio, and television. As opposed to the new information technologies, the new media, and I think Joris Coleman mentioned yesterday, social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook and so on. I think we need to, when we talk about media, we need to make that distinction, because obviously the one is far more accessible to the people of this country. That would primarily be radio, of course, probably followed by newspapers and then television. And then obviously, I don't have the stats with me, but we have a very small percentage of our population that has access to the laptop or the computer for access to their own information. And yet, on the other hand, and I think this is something the conference needs to explore, is the proliferation of mobile phones. Most of you will know that just about everybody in Namibia has a mobile phone. And so I think we need to be creative when we look at information and what to do about getting information to the people when we look at the fact that so many Namibians have in their hands that tool. But at the moment that tool is used mainly for the purposes of communication, i.e. with friends and colleagues, than to receive information. So I think again, especially in the absence of an access to information law, which even if this campaign does speed it, will still take some time to come, that we need to look at getting information or getting access for our people to information via the mobile device as well as the other media. I'm going to take just 2 seconds to actually look at ourselves, the so-called traditional media, and to really ask the question as to what we can do or do better in order to better give people access to information. And I will just run through this list. They're not exhaustive, and I'll be very quick. I do think that it's incumbent upon the media to be more investigative in the public interest, especially in the absence of such access to information legislation. I think it is happening, but I do think it needs to happen more and better. I do think it's very important for the media, despite a pluralism of ownership, and there are different owned media, as most of you know, whether it be government or corporate or private, that the ownership of that media ensure editorial independence, because editorial independence is the best way to get information across to the people in the least skewed form, put it that way. I do think that it's incumbent upon the media to strive for excellence. Sometimes I'm disappointed at the standards of journalism in Namibia, and I do think it's very, very important, because in the eyes of the people, the quality of our journalism will be suspect if it is not increasingly improving on a daily basis. I think it's important for the media to set the agenda. If governments can't or won't, then media needs to ask those difficult questions which people want to know but are also unable to ask. I think media needs to adhere very strictly to the code of ethics, because I think ethical media contributes for the credibility of the information we are providing or giving to our people. Again, I think media needs to be, traditional media needs to be as interactive as possible with our population, because I think it needs to embrace new media, and you will look at the Namibian, for example, which has its SMS pages, again, a way of harnessing opinions from people who might not otherwise have had access to the media, and hopefully they can put their views forward, especially about government, and government can take note, that is, if they are listening, and that in turn can determine their agenda. I think also language is vitally important. Outreach via the media in our official language still has limitations, so I think it's important that there are more media out there who promote access to other languages to get closer to the people. And finally, I think journalists really need to be close to their communities. I'm quite astounded nowadays to find more and more journalists aren't reading, aren't really particularly active in their various communities, and I think they need to be there for the people. And I need to emphasize, although a lot of people hit on media simply because government isn't always available, and we are the conduit, that at the same time I think media have done a lot to expose a lot of wrongdoing in this country, and also to provide access to information in a positive sense. I don't think that is often acknowledged, really, and I think many of the examples that have been cited in this room in the course of the morning and the rest of the conference have been actually exposés by the media. This type of information would not have been freely made available by the government. And my very last point is, and that came from a comment in this morning's session, that the media need to keep on certain issues and drive them till the end. I totally agree with that in principle, but must also remind the audience that it is very difficult for the media or anyone else to operate in an environment where the audience is passive. Again, I think it's vital that our people need to stand up. We're looking at all sorts of ways and means of providing them for information, but at the end of the day, it's their voice that counts. And if they are not in touch with us, if they are not putting their issues on the agenda, then it's very difficult for us to flog a dead horse, if you like. I think that's me for the time being. Thank you all.
Good morning, everyone. I want to pick up on the point that Gwen raised at the end, and that is really the passive audience. I think access to information is a given, in the sense that it's everyone's right to have access to this information. But for me, one of the issues that has become, in a way, problematic is sitting now on the other side of the fence, if I can call it that. I run a small NGO. I work with civil society in public health. And there's a lot of issues in health that are coming out, and the media are carrying some of these issues. But the difficulty that we're finding is that when there are critical issues that we really need communities to get involved in, for example, alcohol abuse or alcohol misuse, gender violence, there are issues that are covered, but the issue seems to come up again from trying to provide information, is that in general a lot of the media tend to have an agenda of